Good morning. It is Monday, the 1st of December. I'm Méabh Mc Mahon, and this is Europe Today, Euronews' daily live fix of European news and analysis. Coming up today, all eyes on Florida. 1 week after the high-stake talks in Geneva to end the war in Ukraine, top American officials met with the Ukrainian delegation yesterday in Mar-a-Lago. This as a corruption scandal hit Kyiv, leading to the resignation of President Zelensky's right-hand man, Andriy Yermak. To break it all down, I'm joined here in the studio by Euronews' Ukraine correspondent, Sasha Vakalina. Good morning, Sasha. Great to have you with us.
Morning.
So we heard there was some progress in Florida, but still more needs to be done. What are the sticking points?
The main sticking points have not changed, and first and foremost, this will be regarding the territorial concessions, because what we're hearing at this stage is that it's only Ukraine that's being asked to cede any territories or to accept, to admit and agree to a bigger compromise. We've heard from Donald Trump himself a week ago, and he said the concession from Russia is that Russia stops fighting, but nothing about the territories. Interestingly, we did see Marco Rubio now in Florida taking a bigger role, and let's listen to what he had to say about it.
It's not just about the terms that ends fighting. It's about also the terms that set up Ukraine for long-term prosperity. I thought we started laying the groundwork for that, most certainly in Geneva. I think we continued that work in our communications throughout the week. I think we built on that again today, but there's more work to be done. This is delicate, it's complicated, there are a lot of moving parts, and obviously there's another party involved here that'll have to be a part of the equation, and that'll continue later this week when Mr. Woodcock travels to Moscow.
We already had a successful meeting in Geneva, and today we continued this success. So at the moment, this meeting was productive and successful. On the later stages, hopefully, we'll keep you updated.
Well, the most productive and indeed the most successful part of that meeting, Maeve, is that the fact that it actually took place, which means that the diplomatic process continues there.
And indeed, we're seeing them there side by side. And of course, President Macron will be hosting President Zelensky today in Paris. What are you looking out for in those meetings?
It's interesting. This is the situation when Ukraine is trying to somehow balance and join the Europeans. We might see the repetition of what happened after the Alaska summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, when we saw Zelensky coming to Brussels and then traveling to Washington with the Europeans so that they could represent this joint position of the interests of Ukraine but also Europe. Because, of course, in the very first version of the so-called 28-point plan that was leaked and everybody saw, the European position was not represented. And later, some of Europe's most important points were actually incorporated by Kyiv, and they are now represented by Kyiv. So they are trying to balance this position to represent all of it together.
And meanwhile, Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, will be heading to Moscow tomorrow. What do you expect from those talks, and how do Ukrainians feel about this?
There are going to be interesting meetings taking place in Moscow this week. China's foreign ministry is also there. Have official meetings today and tomorrow. Witkoff is indeed on his way to Moscow. He will try to negotiate first with Putin's aide. That would probably be Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev. But also, allegedly tomorrow, he's about to meet with Putin. Now, what Moscow wants out of it is not only their position to be represented. What Vladimir Putin wants now, first and foremost, is a one-on-one meeting with Donald Trump. It is unclear when it's going to happen. You remember the Budapest summit was cancelled because there were no compromise coming from Moscow. Now, there are two interesting things here. On one hand, we do have Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, expecting to have a meeting with Donald Trump anytime soon, initially planned by the end of November. Well, that's gone. And also, at the same time, there is an expected meeting very much pushed for by Moscow for Putin to meet with Trump one-on-one without Zelensky.
OK, Sasha Vakalina, thank you so much for all those details. And for more of Sasha's reporting, you can, of course, take a look at Euronews.com. But staying on that story, coming up, we'll be joined by General Ben Hodges, a former commanding general of the US Army Europe and an infantry officer who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Since retirement back in 2018, Ben Hodges has now become a leading analyst and author on European defence and security. Ben, welcome to Europe Today. It's so lovely to have you with us, General.
Maeve, thank you for the privilege.
Look, how realistic, in your view, are the current efforts to bring Russia and Ukraine to the same table?
Well, I think it's sad for me to say this, but I think Europe and Ukraine, including Ukraine, knows that the United States has a primary interest, which is business with Russia after this is all concluded. With the revelations of this past week about what Mr. Witkoff was doing and Jared Kushner with their Russian colleagues, I think that Europe is slowly waking to the realization that they cannot count on the U.S. to be a fair interlocutor here, and that the outcome, if it goes the way that Mr. Witkoff and Jared Kushner wanted to go with the Russians, is going to be a massive problem for Europe, because it will be such an unsatisfactory outcome for Ukraine that I think we'll see millions more Ukrainian refugees heading into Central and Western Europe.
So you think President Trump has no empathy here for Ukrainians or what's happening on the ground, but it's purely just business interests?
Absolutely. I will give him credit for being sincere when he says he wants the killing to stop. The problem is the administration's approach has always been doomed from the start, because they didn't care about the origin. They didn't care about the history or the geography involved. And in fact, approached it as a massive real estate deal. So, I mean, Secretary Rubio, who I really expected much more from him, said in the beginning, Ukraine, you're going to have to give up some territory here, before they even started.
And Secretary Rubio, he's meant to be in Brussels this week for important NATO talks, but he's skipping that meeting. Is that unusual?
It is unusual, but that's part of the problem. The United States has, under this administration, has made a decision, I think, or prioritization of Western Hemisphere, Indo-Pacific region, probably Middle East, and then Europe is number 4. And I think that despite the best efforts of many European countries to fulfill their responsibilities and to take on more of the responsibilities, the United States really sees Europe as inconsequential, except maybe for some business purposes. So this is important, and it pains me to say that after being a NATO officer and a U.S. Army officer for all these years, but Ukraine and Europe together are going to have to. And by the way, they do have the capability. If you add together the industry, the wealth, the populations, the technologies, there's no reason that Europe, including Ukraine, cannot stop Russia. What they lack is the self-confidence and the political will.
And now we're seeing Ukrainians being pressured into conceding territory, which is, of course, a red line for them. How do you think this war will end?
Well, the Ukrainians are not going to do this. I mean, there's no way they can do this, because this is not dirt. These are people. There are 4 million Ukrainians that live in these occupied territories, or the parts of Ukraine that the administration is pressing them to give up. And anybody that knows anything about Russia knows that this is not going to be the end, that Russia's not going to say, okay, we're good, we don't want anything else. Nobody seriously believes that. And so the Ukrainians, I think, and by the way, one of the false premises of this whole thing is that Ukraine is losing the war. That's just not the case. And after 11 years, Russia still only occupies 20% of Ukraine with all the advantages. We see reports every day about Russia's wartime economy is struggling. Their great railroad, which is an essential part of Russia's ability to do what it does, is in deep trouble. And now some of the oblasts are not even able to pay these famous bonuses to Russian soldiers. So I think Ukrainians can see that better than we can.
And just briefly, the corruption scandal that's hit President Zelensky's cabinet, is this overshadowing a little bit the peace talks, or could damage his credibility? What do you think?
Well, it certainly is getting a lot of attention, but what's not getting attention is that even in a country that is at war, that they still had their anti-corruption efforts underway. They launched a raid on Yermak's house, and he's gone. So I think some other countries in this discussion could follow that example.
And just briefly, we saw President Trump this weekend calling to close the skies over Venezuela. Do you think another war is looming, or is this just political posturing?
Well, I think they would prefer to be able to, that Maduro would step down, and then the U.S. would gain access to Venezuelan oil and other things. And there's no other leaders in South America, by the way, that are clamoring to protect Maduro or Venezuela. But the point is, I think the administration has not been entirely clear about what the strategic objectives are. And this is where the Congress really has to step in.
Okay. General Ben Hodges, thank you so much for speaking to us here on Europe Today. We'll have you on again very soon. But now, moving on, have you heard about the squabbles here in Brussels between the airline industry, EU capitals and consumer rights groups over better protection and compensation for us when we're flying with European airlines? Ida Sanchez has been taking a look.
There's nothing more tedious than waiting at the airport due to a flight delay. Or perhaps there is. The negotiations to reform the EU's passenger rights law, which have been stalled for a decade. The main sticking point: compensation for delayed flights. The EU is discussing giving passengers more money when their flight is delayed by 3 hours or more. But the airlines are refusing and also want the threshold to be increased from 3 to 5 hours. Airlines say the changes being discussed would increase their cost by 40% every year. That cost would be passed on to passengers, making flights even more expensive. But consumer associations think that raising the compensation threshold would see 60% of passengers losing out on compensation. The situation is so tense that airlines have asked to hold the negotiations. For now, talks between EU institutions continue.
And fingers crossed, a deal is sealed before the Christmas break here in Europe, when millions of us will be travelling through European airports trying to get home to spend time with family. As one thing is sure, flight delays can lead to excessive doom scrolling on social media sites. Our reporter Jakub Janis has been taking a look at how social media addiction is keeping European politicians up at night.
It was the topic over the weekend for many families in Europe. We are in the middle of a cognitive war, said President Macron, and he wasn't far off. In China, the version of TikTok for kids shows science experiments and shuts off after a strict 40 minutes. In Europe, the same app serves up virtual dances and content, often described as brain rot. Now Europe is striking back. Last week, the European Parliament approved by a large majority a proposal calling for a ban on social media for teens under 16. The reason? 1 in 4 minors now display smartphone use, comparable to addiction. Is it in the content? Or is it in its manipulative designs like infinite scrolling and autoplay videos? Ursula von der Leyen is already taking notes. She confirmed she's watching Australia, which restricts platforms like TikTok for teenagers, for policy actions. But will the EU be limiting our online freedoms here? Well, we already regulate cigarettes to protect our lungs, don't we? Now we might ban scrolls to protect our minds from avoiding, in Macron's words, a digital Wild West. Because if it is a cognitive war, we cannot afford to lose the next generation to an algorithm. Right, Alexa?
Absolutely, Alexa. And that is also why the European Parliament wants to hold tech giants like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg personally responsible for violating EU rules on protecting minors online. More on that story on Euronews.com or download our app for more. But that does conclude Monday's edition of Europe Today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning here on Euronews.
Considering similar The Europe Conversation.